Hey, what's good, tubers? Nannu the Nerd here, and in my ongoing quest to frustrate and depress myself, today we'll be responding to Steven Crowder's DEBUNKED
Top 5 Socialism Lies.
But before we start, I'd like to answer two important questions. First, what is a Crowder, and what is a socialism? In 2000, Crowder's parents got him started in the entertainment industry by landing him a voice acting role on the children's animated program Arthur as Alan the Brain Powers, a character who, unlike Crowder, is actually pretty intelligent.
Since the dawn of civilization, people have held superstitious beliefs, but no one has ever proved one of these superstitions to be true.
Anyway, a few years later, he got his first big break into live action with the 2005 film Three Needles, an anthology piece consisting of 3 short stories, all revolving around AIDS.
Okay, listen, Denny. We're looking for somebody with work-related experience.
Oh, and by the way, this movie is fucking insane. For example, in Crowder's segment, a woman purposefully contracts AIDS by sucking the blood of her HIV-positive porn star son in order to get a payday from their health insurance.
How could you not?
Oh, and the guy playing that porn star also plays Bobby Drake in the Bryan Singer X-Men movies.
Have you tried not being HIV positive?
Anyway, after Three Needles, Crowder somehow got typecast as a douchey, party, frat bro type.
Dylan just called. He said he saw 3 cop cars heading this way on Old Dell Road.
I think we need another round.
Which is funny because while Crowder is a mega douche and he definitely gives off some fratty vibes, he's also an awkward, virginal party pooper who hates marijuana.
Traffic fatalities regarding marijuana have skyrocketed.
Since marijuana legalization, highway fatalities in Colorado are at near historic lows.
Bring up the study that we wrote. We wrote about it.
I got the article. I've been looking at it for like the last few minutes on your website. There's a couple statements that are really bad just off the gate, like this right here. If you want to get high, you're a moron.
Oh, wait a minute. If you want to get high, you're a moron?
Yeah, I think
you
Courtney
really
believes
think
that,
you're
yeah.
a moron?
I think Courtney believes that, yeah.
Who's Courtney?
She works
for
probably
you?
one of the best writers I think I've ever encountered. To try and go, do you think people who smoke pot are morons? No, it's a joke.
That marijuana is in some way or another a dangerous thing.
Yes.
I can tell you that it's not.
No, I didn't say in a dangerous thing.
You reluctantly give up.
I said I'll give it to you. You're right. Let's assume I'm wrong.
You're definitely wrong.
Let's assume I'm wrong.
You don't want to talk about it because you're wrong.
No, I don't want to talk because I don't care. But it is a valid issue when people of Colorado are looking at this now, and there are people in Colorado who might vote differently on the marijuana issue because of how it's perceived or because of the information at hand.
It was
shit,
unlikely
it's 5
source.
o'clock?
Yeah. Well, you don't tell me you have to leave now.
My
before
flight's
we
at
turn
6.
this around. Well, you're going to miss your flight no matter what now. You're fucked. We're going to be fine, dude.
But thinks tobacco gets kind of a bad rap, man.
Nicotine, when separated, by the way, from the dangerous habit of cigarettes, specifically inhaled tobacco, not the boogeyman it's made out to be. There are some cities where pipe smokers live longer. So, Bill, good on you. You're smaller, Asian, and you smoke a pipe, so you're going to live till 105. Smoking tobacco products, by the way, can cause cancer, obviously. Yeah. Again, this is mainly in relation to cigarettes. Yeah. Again, though, the rats couldn't get addicted to nicotine by itself. Who do you think is more powerful? The tobacco lobby? We've been told they're the boogeyman, or the anti-tobacco lobby?
The first real role where Crowder played a named character was a bizarre Christian propaganda flick called To Save a Life. Now, I don't want to say too much about it here because it's so hilariously bad, I'll have to do a separate video on it at some point. But just to give you all a little taste, a little tease.
Ooh, she got you on that one, dude.
Yeah, you know, your mom.
Anyhow, after struggling to launch an acting career, Crowder tried stand-up comedy, which went about as well as could be expected.
Comedy seemed like something that wouldn't require great intelligence.
After that, he started a conservative vlogging / sketch comedy YouTube channel.
And as for Sarah Palin, she's fine. I think she's been great for Alaska. I think she could have been great for the country. Torture. The term is thrown around so flippantly nowadays, it's lost all meaning. Let's take a look at some of these torture techniques used at Club Gitmo.
Military funding cut. Looks like now I have a shot. You're weakening the home team, so my job is really easy.
And within months was picked up by conservative PJ Media. This allowed Crowder to worm his way into a position at Fox News as a regular guest and opinion columnist, and also a position at Breitbart as a regular writer for their Big Hollywood section. The Big Hollywood section has since been closed down, but in case you were wondering what it was like, just imagine your conspiracy-loving racist uncle had a shitty movie and celeb gossip blog and you're pretty much there. But after 4 years of being Fox News' newest boy toy, he got fired for saying this.
I am consistently amazed at Sean Hannity's inability to host his own show. He's a dear, dear man, a very nice person. But the same thing with Michael Moore. These liberals who aren't even that smart just come in and absolutely bulldoze him like a child.
All right, now pay close attention, because this is probably the only nice thing I'm going to say about him this entire video. No lie? Serious props for dunking on Sean Hannity here. Well, he was going to get props, but not only did he immediately issue an apology, it appears as if he learned the exact wrong lesson from this experience. Instead of rethinking his politics or his career as a right-wing yes-man, he now avoids criticizing anyone on the right and carefully toes the acceptable party line, like a good little boy. But all that was in the past. What is a present tense Crowder? Well, he's still being propped up by his parents, who are heavily involved in the creation of his internet show, Louder with Crowder, where he makes a living polishing boots and selling coffee mugs. I'm dead-ass serious. In case you haven't heard, for the low, low price of 100 clams a year, you too can get a regular shipment of lovingly handcrafted mugs and gain access to exclusive content not available anywhere else. Act now and you can get 30% off your order as long as you're young and impressionable, a war criminal, or a pig. You want to know a dirty little secret? Not only does Crowder not offer any exclusive content for signing up for this mug club, but the automatic recurring payments of $100 a year doesn't entitle you to 1 mug per month, or even 1 mug per year, but 1 mug per account. Please allow 5 to 7 weeks for delivery. That's right. This total simp and desperate losers like him paid over $200 for a cheap, shitty-ass coffee mug. Damn, I really should have been a right-winger, because it couldn't be easier to scam these troglodytes. They'll fall for literally anything. But what pisses me off the most is not only does he scam his audience and peddle an extremist far-right content, but he hides all of it behind this plausible deniability of, it's just a joke, bruh.
I apologize to the gay community for pointing out and making jokes regarding the statistics that reflect AIDS as being virtually and entirely a homosexual disease in the modern world, and failing to point out the additional single-digit contribution rate from recycled hypodermic needle users. I did a great disservice to our audience in robbing them of accurate and potentially helpful reporting. I apologize.
Because he's too big of a bitch to commit to any of his beliefs. But wait, there's more! Despite the fact that he regularly posts recycled Fox News talking points that have already been thoroughly debunked, it's quite possible that Crowder doesn't actually believe any of his own horseshit.
To answer the question of why I actually stopped going on his show was because just some things that Stephen had said to me off camera that kind of led me to believe that a lot of the things that he says about the LGBT stuff are not really how he feels, and that it's more of an act, and that it's more just what his audience wants, and it's pandering a little bit.
Now, Blair White here isn't exactly a reliable source of information, even here, but Crowder being insincere with his devotion to right-wing libertarianism would explain why, when pressed on anything, he folds faster than the Flash on Laundry Day, and also why he's so notorious for ducking debates.
There's also instances where I challenged him to debates back in the day, not recently, but he would never acknowledge me. I mean, one time he did send his, like, little brother after me.
His brother?
Yeah, like, I don't know if it was his younger brother or his older brother. I think it was his little brother. Was like, you're a fucking faggot or whatever. I'm like, why won't your brother debate me?
It seems that Steven Crowder has maybe gotten some cold feet.
Okay.
And feeling a little intimidated, so I don't think he's coming.
So I wanted to say to Dave, Steven, and others, stop being cowards and debate Sam already. My goodness, get to it.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
Hold on, why would someone commit so hard to something they don't actually believe in? Well, now, my personal theory is that he can only achieve sexual arousal by shoving thousands of dollars of dirty coke money all the way up his pussy. But whether he's a sincere Ayn Rand stan or a mindless shill, I know, what's the difference? There's really no excuse for bad arguments, so regardless of what a Crowder was or what a Crowder is, what a Crowder will be is completely obliterated with facts and or logic.
Sexually humiliated by my rock-hard, throbbing rationality. Castrated by my superior argumentation skills. Harassed by my pursuit of knowledge. Dominated by my commitment to that point.
There seems to be a lot of confusion on the right about what exactly socialism is.
This match will get red hot.
Whether they're feigning ignorance or truly are that stupid, I'll leave up to you, but there's no reason that my audience should languish in ignorance, so I thought I'd explain as best I can what socialism is, just so that we're all on the same page before we start in the blood sports. While I would consider myself a socialist, I'll do my best to define socialism in a way that is as morally neutral and objective as possible. Socialism is a political and economic theory defined as one in which the means of production, distribution, and exchange is owned and or regulated by the community as a whole. By means of production, what I mean are things like office buildings, trucks, factories, cash registers, computers, robots, AI programs, basically any and all tools needed to turn our labor into the useful goods and services that make modern life possible. By owned and or regulated by the community as a whole, what I'm trying to do is draw a distinction between socialism and capitalism, as under our current economic system, these vital resources are held by private individuals or corporations and are rented out to us in exchange for meager wages. This ownership distinction between employer and employee is one that creates a lot of problems in the world today, and while not a silver bullet by any means, I do think that eliminating these distinct economic classes and having the workers themselves control what, where, and how they make what they make would alleviate a lot of social and economic inequality. So a socialist would, by extension, be a person who believes that society, you don't got any more of that society should move towards implementing this kind of economic structure. Whew, okay. I think that's been more than enough preamble, so with all that out of the way, here's the good shit.
All right, listen closely, you punks, because you're about to be educated.
Into the top socialist lies, top 5 myths that people I guess these just continually, let's just start with this. Bernie Sanders town hall at Fox News, it personified everything wrong with the left wing.
We're white.
I happen to believe, Joe, that we have an absurd tax system. And while millions of people today are paying actually more in taxes than they anticipated, Amazon, Netflix, and dozens of major corporations, as a result of Trump's tax bill, paid nothing in federal taxes. I think that's a disgrace.
Straight out of the gate, and we're already dealing with some dishonest hackery here. But first, an explanation on Crowder's format that I think will be helpful as I deconstruct this video. It appears as if Crowder and the gang prep some clips and graphs and shit beforehand, but then do a live reaction to the content before editing it down to make them appear more reasonable than they actually are. And I gotta say, the editor really did them a solid by not including the 7 seconds that followed in this short clip of Bernie here.
I think that's a disgrace. So today we announced...
Did you fucking hear that? A Fox News audience cheered for raising Amazon's taxes.
Surely you can't be serious.
That's not the only thing they cheered, by the way.
I believe that healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. Okay? We have got, as a nation, to reject Trump's idea that climate change is a hoax.
I'll leave a link to the full video below so you can see I'm not trying to pull a Crowder here, but I think I've already made my point here that even among Crowder's base of support, these left-wing populist ideas are overwhelmingly popular. And I think that's because, unlike anything the right could ever offer them, these progressive policies actually make their lives demonstrably better. But see, workers getting a better deal is inconvenient to the financial interests of Crowder's sponsors. His true sponsors, by the way, not the mugcucks. And that's why he's lying here, at least by omission. And look, love me or hate me, at least I'm not trying to bullshit you by obscuring publicly known and easily accessible information to push a harmful agenda.
What you don't say is that everybody paid less in taxes than they did under Obama, or they would under you piece of shit.
So first off, fuck Obama.
You take that back.
But he's not really relevant to this conversation, so let's set him aside and we'll talk about Bush 2.0 some other day. As a card-carrying member of the Brothers Bernard, I'd love to show you what Bernie's tax plan actually was like. And would you look at that? Contrary to what Crowder would have you believe, unless you make over $250,000 a year, you wouldn't have seen an increase to your taxes whatsoever. So we've got two options here. Either Crowder doesn't believe anyone in America makes less than $250,000 a year, or more likely, he knows that most people wouldn't be affected by this tax increase whatsoever, and just wants you to blindly hate any tax hike so that his daddy and his wealthy donors don't have to feel weird by indirectly helping the poor. Also, it bears mentioning that for most families, even those above the $250,000 a year threshold, the services that would have been provided by Medicare for All, etc., would have resulted in a net savings by cutting out all of the inefficiencies of our private healthcare system. Now, this isn't just my lefty bias because even research conducted by the notoriously biased koch-funded Mercatus Institute found that transitioning to Medicare for all would save tons of money, not just on like a governmental or society level, but on an individual level as well.
By the way, did you notice he said dozens of corporations? Dozens. Just run a quick search and see how many corporations there are in the United States. Hint, it's a lot more than dozens.
If we missed a couple of dozen, that's okay.
This is the dishonesty.
He said the phrase dozens of corporations, but actually, there's more than a dozen corporations in America. Checkmate, socialists. All right, let's replay this clip again, because either I'm missing something or Crowder and his page sycophants are lying again.
Dozens of major corporations, as a result of Trump's tax bill, paid nothing in federal taxes. I think that's a disgrace.
So yeah, it's abundantly clear that they're just deliberately misinterpreting Bernie's statements to form a narrative.
What? No.
Credit where credit is due, this is actually a really good tactic because the contrary position is that it's morally acceptable for our most profitable corporations to leech off of our public resources and exploit our labor without giving anything back to society. Now, at the end of the day, I don't really give a shit if you're the type of son of a bitch that believes that's acceptable, but at least have the balls to admit it.
They're paying more than they expected because they wanted an even bigger tax cut that you and the media deceived them into thinking they wouldn't even get. Even the New York Times did an expose on this. Many people who got a tax cut didn't actually believe that they got one at all. Most people saved money, paid less in taxes this year.
Because I don't suck off rich people for a living, I don't believe that taxes are always inherently bad. In fact, sometimes taxes are good, especially when they're collected from people who won't miss the money anyway, and especially when those funds are applied to things like healthcare or education, which benefits everyone's society, even those who aren't personally using those services. But let's get back to the article. Oh, and again, I'm not a hack, so I'll actually link the article in the description so y'all can check my work in case you have any doubts. According to Crowder's own source, while most tax brackets did in fact get a tax cut, most poor people did not. The undeniable fact that there are way more poor people than rich people is enough to cast serious doubt on Crowder's claim that most people saved money, paid less in taxes this year.
Most people saved money, paid less in taxes this year.
But did you catch that slip up there? He started by saying saved money, but corrected himself to paid less in taxes. Now, this might sound like a minor semantic difference, but it actually highlights a very important issue with allowing right-wing ideologues a place in government. Because while Republicans love cutting taxes, especially for corporations and the super wealthy, they also love cutting important regulations, infrastructure, and social safety net programs. So even though some people did in fact receive a modest tax cut, they're going to be net losing way more as essential services are deregulated and privatized. To say nothing of the environmental and health costs of gutting agencies such as the EPA and the CDC. Basically, my point is that in the long run, most Americans are going to see a lowering in their standard of living. Now, of course, the economic consequences of this will be felt most by the poorest Americans, which are disproportionately black and brown people, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence, guys. Now look, I know there's no chance in hell that Crowder does any actual research on these topics, but my point here is that there's a ton of information out there on how the right intentionally fucks up the lives of vulnerable people for the benefit of our corporate overlords. Now, don't get me wrong, the Democrats suck dick too, but they usually aren't as openly contemptuous of the electorate. What was the point of all this again? Oh yeah, Trump isn't saving people money, you dingus. In fact, holistically speaking, even wealthy fail sons like Crowder are going to be worse off financially under Trump.
The middle class benefited from the tax cut. Everyone did. But I bet you're paying more than you thought. Well, what are you saying? You thought you were going to get a bigger price break. Screw you.
The outrage here is that people expected more of a tax break, while wealthy corporations paid nothing at all. I just wish Crowder could be honest here, that as a conservative libertarian, he thinks that titans of industry represent a superior breed of humanity with a monopoly on creativity and innovation, and should just be above the law, and that the peasant underclass should be compelled by the force of government to support their decadent lifestyles. Or maybe he doesn't believe any of that, in which case, stop simping for Ayn Rand and promoting bullshit libertarian talking points, you delusional fuckwit.
This is how socialism works. It deceives people into thinking they're worse off than they are by lying lying to them and then using that misery to get elected, promising to solve everyone's problem with free money.
Wow, he's so fractally wrong and vomits out these bogus claims in such a rapid succession that it'll take a little bit of time to deconstruct this. Let's just take it one at a time, okay?
This is how socialism works. It deceives people into thinking they're worse off than they are by lying to them.
How is this possible? No, seriously, I need someone to explain this to me. If you're watching right now and have any idea what he's driving at, please, for the love of God, drop me a comment, because the way I see it, you might be able to weaponize people's legitimate frustrations with neoliberal capitalism against completely innocent people, you know, like what Republicans do to legal Mexican immigrants. But convincing happy, healthy, and fulfilled people that they're actually miserable seems impossible to me.
And then using that misery to get elected.
First off, I don't believe this is an accurate representation of what is happening, as most socialist rhetoric I've engaged with is by its very nature hopeful and optimistic. In fact, isn't that one of the most common criticisms of us socialists? That we're too utopian, that our ideas are amazing on paper, but could never work in the real world. But whatever. Even if socialists were using misery to get elected, I do think that that could be a legitimate and valid strategy.
Promising to solve everyone's problem with free money.
Money is an abstract concept of value that facilitates the transfer of resources. Resources solve problems, so until we can move past this current capitalist paradigm and into a system of resource distribution that has moved beyond the need for currency, everyone's kind of stuck using money. But don't get it twisted. It's not free money, and no one on the left claims that it is. It's tax money. I mean, and ideally taken from our country's laziest parasites.
Is looking at you, kid.
By the off chance you are molding libertarian about to comment, taxes are theft. Taxes aren't theft. Even if taxes were theft, theft isn't inherently bad. Even if theft was inherently bad, if it results in a positive outcome, then theft can be justified. Fuck off, the ends do justify the means.
And this was, we'll get to the top 5, I think the biggest myths, the most pervasive myths. All this was reiterated. There was an article this week announcing meanstv. Did you see it? It's an online socialist media network who, without a hint of irony, will be it'll be a paid subscription service.
Hey, what's good, tubers? Nannu the Socialist here, and I don't get the joke. Yeah, I mean, for many of us socialists, the eventual end goal is communism, which by definition would be a society in which money is no longer used as a means of distributing resources, along with, you know, not having economic classes or a state. But even then, there are some socialists who believe in maintaining some limited form of currency, such as labor vouchers, and or allowing some markets to continue. But regardless about how meanstv or other folks might view how society should be, the fact remains that in our current economic system, if you don't have money, you literally die. So to rephrase Crowder's argument, you're not willing to starve to death? Some socialist you are. To which my response would be, how come you're not willing to go to jail for tax evasion? Some libertarian you are. You see how weak and flimsy this line of argumentation is? You live in a society and yet critique it. Curious.
Steven, that's a tax.
So I think the joke here is that us leftists are more amenable to mechanisms of private enterprise if we were to call it taxation.
Got him.
Here's the thing, even if we were to obliquely define all individual expenditures as a tax, under current actually existing capitalism, we pay way more in taxes for the basic necessities than we would under a socialist or even a mixed economy. Here's some real dank political theory for you. Paying private taxes is actually worse than paying public taxes, as our public institutions are, at least in theory, more accountable to public scrutiny and thus prevent some of the perverse pressures in the private purview precipitated by the pathological pursuit of pure profit.
Coming soon to home video.
So I went to their site to see what they were about. And again, let me know which socialist candidate you want us to live stream next week, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern. Sanders, Harris, Klobuchar, Buttigieg, Warren.
Wait, is Crowder literally defining socialism as stuff I don't like? Because, I mean, seriously, what ideological position do any of these chucklefucks have in common? I mean, look, I won't fight you on the fact that Bernie is a socialist, although, to be fair... he didn't run as a full-on socialist, but on a platform he would describe as democratic socialism, but what most poli-sci nerds would call social democracy. So, okay, fine, you got one, but none of the other candidates were even in favor of Medicare for all, which, for the record, isn't socialism, by the way. And I would argue that of the lot of them, only Warren Warren could accurately be described as even a progressive liberal, and even then only with like 6 or 7 asterisks.
Went to their site, meanstv, to see what they're... No surprises. I felt like this segment was long overdue. Let's cycle through the top 5. All right, let's get to it.
After 3 minutes of vamping for time, we're about to get to the first actual point. Hoo boy.
Number 5 is that there is no class mobility. The cards are stacked against you. This comes directly from the new paid subscription socialist network.
You only really have like so many options. You can go to the factory, you can go to the college, or you can go to the army.
What? I feel like I have no options. And you proceed to name all the options. 3 unbelievable options. By the way, the offshoots from those 3 options are probably at least 3,000 options. Like I could work at a factory and work your way up to vice president.
Working your way up the corporate ladder to vice president is just bullshit. I mean, statistically, it has to have happened at some point in history, but realistically speaking, it's basically impossible. Now look, I'm just talking about shitty service sector jobs here. Manufacturing jobs basically don't exist in America anymore.
Work your factory, This was in Detroit.
Especially in Detroit, Jesus.
Where a UAW worker cost the company an average of over $130,000 a year.
What? This makes no fucking sense. Are you really saying that a factory loses a net $130,000 a year per worker? Or is that actually just the expenses not offset by the profit made off the workers? Hold on, let me look this unsourced claim up.
Take a spin, now you're in with the techno set. You're going surfing on the internet.
Okay, so I couldn't find any good primary sources, but this appears to be an evidenceless claim made by the then chairman and CEO of Delphi, an old subsidiary of GM, now restructured into a corporation called Aptiv PLC, that combining all wages and benefits, the average worker was compensated about $130,000 a year for their work. Now, the company was undergoing restructuring at the time, so their financials are complicated and public information on this is pretty sparse. But considering this motherfucker had all the reason in the world to lie, I don't know, man, my skeptic senses are tingling. Add to it that this is net cost of employment, but says nothing about how much the assembly line workers brought in for the company. I don't know, man.
I could go into the military. Oh, you mean you could get tuition paid for? Work your way up to, I don't know, officer? Not to mention serve your country?
This is it. I finally cracked. All the isolation and quarantine has melted my brain meat. What the fuck is going on here? Like, is Crowder so detached from reality that he thinks that you can work your way up to an officer position? I promise, I'm not going to let this devolve into a rant on the US military, but as a veteran, I can say, first off, don't join the military, kids. But secondly, and more relevantly, that's not how it works. You come in enlisted, you almost always stay enlisted. In fact, among the 42 active duty 4-star generals, that's max rank for you civilians, 41 definitively did not start their career off enlisted. As for the oddball out, I just didn't have enough information to tell for sure one way or the other, but all indications point to the conclusion that he was never enlisted either. It's almost like the military's hierarchical power structure isn't meritocratic. Oh, jeepers. Sure am glad that horrifying revelation couldn't be applied to broader society.
Oh, I gotta go to college and choose any of the hundreds of degrees available there? This is like, I only got 3 options.
No, I can't do anything.
Why are you complaining?
Sounds horrible.
Let's be real here. For the majority of Americans, college is ridiculously expensive, especially if you're a valet struggling to make ends meet in Detroit.
I was a valet captain in downtown Detroit.
And even with a college degree, finding work that pays the bills can be difficult, to say the least.
The options I got are only infinity.
Now look, I'm no SJW. In fact, hypersensitive snowflakes piss me the hell off. Which is why I could never be a right-winger. But can we all just admit that this shit is kind of fucking racist?
The options I got are only infinity. It's only $9.99 a month. I buy your cars. I could go to school, study in maybe like the STEM field, or get on Shark Tank. What the f?
Like, at least a little.
You can't call my daddy Steven Crowder a racist.
If you think I'm jumping to conclusions, you must not be familiar with Crowder's oeuvre. So let me be clear. Crowder frequently has neo-Nazi and various other white supremacist ethno-stater types on as guests.
Like the coverage of something like Charlottesville, where the left says this death is like so obviously wrong. We're going to spend 4 months covering this and talking about there's no excuses, nothing. They would never bring up data like, let's look at Black Lives Matter crime versus KKK crime.
I'm at the Gaylord convention where I feel most comfortable
If they're not going to stop calling Ben Shapiro with the yarmulke on a Nazi, someone as translucent as you and Lauren Southern haven't got a shot.
What I'm going to do, this is my big plan. Let me know what you think of it. This is my big plan.
Oh wait, this is your final plan? Is this what's look?
This
You're
is
not
my
helping
big.
yourself.
Is this patented yet?
And regularly performs some pretty fucking cringy impersonations that would have been seen as blatantly racist decades ago.
China.
Blame Breakfast at Tiffany's and Mickey Rooney. That is that man's legacy, and I will honor it.
Now look, I can't read his mind, so I don't know or frankly care what he personally believes about race. All I know is that he works with known racists and promotes racist ideas. That's pretty fucking sus to me.
Okay. This idea that there is no social mobility in the United States. The cards are stacked against you. Over the course of their lives, 56% of Americans will find themselves in the top 10%. 73% will spend at least more than a year in the top 20%. Okay? So this idea that there's a static 99 and top 1% ruling class, it's just not true.
So even if you were to trust this data, which you shouldn't as it's from the American Enterprise Institute, a right-wing think tank. More like a right-wing stink tank. Am I right, ladies and gentlemen? But even then, it doesn't say what Crowder thinks it says. In fact, conservatism broadly and libertarianism specifically are so radically incongruous with basic facts about reality that even allowing them to use their heavily skewed data doesn't support their positions. Allow me to demonstrate. Even if 56% of adult Americans over a 44-year period were briefly in the top 10% of income earners, it doesn't say at what point in their lives. Theoretically, it could have all been at the beginning of their lives, indicating a widening gulf between our two economic castes as the less lucky elites face downward economic mobility. Also, this study only touches on income inequality, but says nothing whatsoever about more general economic inequality, which of course is even worse. For example, Bill Gates has an income of about $12 billion a year, or about 1 million times what I made pre-pandemic. But his net worth is over 100 billion, or cannot divide by 0 times my current net worth. But even if we ignore all of my previous objections, the fact of the matter is this single data point says literally nothing about class mobility in the US. In fact, when you actually examine the data, you'll find that the US is one of the worst in the developed world for when it comes to social and economic mobility, and that only about 4% of people born in the bottom 20% will ever make it to the top. Now, of course, even if Crowder wasn't ideologically compromised, he wouldn't be able to comprehend this, as, again, his wealthy parents are directly responsible for every meager accomplishment of his life. He proudly touts the merits of meritocracy, despite never participating in one. Curious.
And this brings me to myth number 4, that capitalism only benefits the wealthy. We hear this all the time, that America sure is a rich country, but for most people it's terrible.
My mom actually told me, like, moving to America just, like, made everything worse.
From where?
Oh my fucking god. At least 2 of the 5 lies of socialism come from the same goddamn meanstv ad. Hey, Crowder and crew, a 2-minute advertisement probably isn't the best way to engage with a hundreds-year-long movement of interdisciplinary academic theory and political activism that is socialism. Also, the overwhelming majority, about 80%, of Americans live paycheck to paycheck and can't afford any emergency expenses because they constantly have to go into a debt to afford basic necessities like healthcare and education. Now, this of course is just one example of many, but even then, it pretty clearly demonstrates that despite the unshakable blind faith of conservative grifters, America ain't that great for most people.
A system in place that keeps us there.
And to find out about that system, like, it's only $9.99 a month. I buy your cars.
I buy your cars.
They're not going to stay poor for long.
Honestly, here's the thing. No system is perfect. But name me any system throughout the history of mankind that has pulled more people out of poverty than the free enterprise and a capitalist system.
But like, what even is poverty, man? It's actually pretty simple. A lack of material resources, money, funds, or capital. So here's the real red pill for you. Capitalism doesn't pull people out of poverty. In fact, through its inequitable and immoral distribution of resources, it creates poverty. For example, we have more than enough food to feed everyone on the planet, a filling, nutritious, and delicious 3 square meals a day, but choose not to because the people who control food production and distribution believe that acquiring digital capitalism points is worth more than human lives. One more quick example. We have enough vacant, unused properties that every homeless person in the United States could have shelter, and it would actually save us money in the long run. But you see, property owners believe racking up more digital capitalism points is worth more than human lives. Now, I don't know if Crowder is evil or ignorant, probably both, but I would have infinitely more respect for the boy if he was willing to be honest with his audience and either accept the horrific human consequences of capitalism or shut the fuck up.
Venezuela, they killed them all.
There you go. The reason Venezuela is so wealthy is because they killed all the poors, but Venezuela is still kind of a poor country. What the fuck? I've got a black belt in both conservative and libertarian mental gymnastics. I mean, I've watched literally hundreds, if not thousands of hours of batshit right-wing commentary, and even I don't know what point they're trying and failing to deploy here. Whatever. Leave a comment down below in the web zone if you've got any ideas what the fuck they're talking about here, because I honestly don't.
You know what? Here, let's do a mental exercise. Everyone watching, pick a system, any system right now. Think of it in your head, okay?
All right, I'm thinking of one.
No, that's the answer.
You got me there. You see, all I had was these facts, logic, and
stunningly good looks.
But you know what? I didn't anticipate straight up denial. You know what? YouTube's canceled, boys. Time to pack it up. Let's go. Fuck it. I'm out of here.
Let's just go under Trump because they try to amplify this with Donald Trump.
Daddy Trump. Daddy Trump.
We have the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. Record numbers of workers returning to the workforce. Highest job labor force participation rate. And by the way, even with all of that, we actually have both the lowest layoff rate and the highest amount of unfulfilled, meaning available jobs, since the Department of Labor began recording the statistics ever.
Now, I was tempted to bring up the fact that the way the US government calculates unemployment is hilariously skewed, but I don't even really have to get into any of that. Why is low unemployment such a good thing in the first place? Ever do think about that? Ever do think about that? I mean, if your job is meaningful, important, and allows you to live a fruitful and happy life, well then of course employment is unquestionably a good thing. But that, frankly, just doesn't describe most jobs. Most jobs are miserable, soulless, monotonous wastes of time that don't allow you to live a comfortable or even a tolerable existence. The headlines that are briefly displayed here don't indicate that we're at some sort of high point for humanity, but rather that workers are historically desperate for good jobs. And in case you need that spelled out for you, that's a bad thing.
It's time to toss your hemp noose over the basement pipe.
Took me some time to translate this because even most boomers don't use the word hip in this context anymore, but I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be a joke about killing yourselves.
What the f***? Like, I'm gonna... We need a new system.
Right. Unironically, this.
Here's one of the biggest ones. You've heard this a lot, right? The idea that there's no wage growth. One of the most common myths is that wages have remained the same. If you factor in inflation and you look at U.S. where people are working more, but they're not getting paid any more money, here you go. You hear it all the time.
All right, let's just hit this one real fast. Yes, while real wages continue to stagnate, the pathological obsession of neoliberals to privatize literally everything means that even if wages for the average American are growing faster than inflation, the cost of maintaining a consistent standard of living is rising faster than people's incomes, which, again, for what feels like the millionth time, means that when it's all said and done, Americans are worse off financially.
The trouble with 2% is 2% kind of just sucks. Wages growing at 2% is not enough to make anyone feel the job market boom.
First off, I don't want to go ad hominem, but is her chin penciled on? It's like the Burgermeister.
Man, we can do ad homs. Like, am I allowed to ad hom Crowder?
No, must resist temptation.
This is just as problematic, to use their word, as the wage gap. The idea of 77 cents in the dollar that just compares women make X, men make Y.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, no, you know what? Nannu presents How Not to Be a Dipshit. Just ask why. Why is it that women make less than men? Well, the conservative answer to this, of course, is that they choose careers that pay less. But why is it that the careers women choose pay less? In fact, what determines wages in the first place? Ever do think about that? For the sake of time, we'll set aside the fact that tons of societally necessary labor is unpaid or underpaid for the larger point that conservatives can't solve any of society's problems because they start with the feeling that things were better in some imagined version of the past and work backwards to justify that feeling. Don't ever get tricked into believing that their positions are rational, logical, or based in evidence because they clearly aren't.
One problem with computing wage growth, the way that the Bureau of Labor the statistics do, is they do average hourly earnings. It's going to get a little nerdy. Let me try and go through this really quickly. That doesn't take into account lifetime wage growth. I highly recommend you check out the sources in the overlay that we bring up here right now. Let me distill it for you. When you take into account individual wage growth as calculated by the census, their current population survey, okay, those models, it's actually closer to 5%. Average
Which doesn't suck.
No.
So here's a great bit of media literacy training for you. If an article's headline is a question, the answer is almost always a resounding no. But let's actually take a look at Crowder's little graph here, and does this look like a consistently upward trend to anyone? Also, the average wage increase is usually less than 3.22%, which is the average yearly inflation rate. Also, the only long-term wage data that they highlighted on this site was white male boomers, so they're definitely trying to put some serious spin on this. But as always, I could concede this entire line of argumentation and still whoop his weak-ass position, as all of this talk ignores the larger point that workers are still earning a microscopic fraction of what they earn for the company, and that all that extra labor value is funneled straight to the top. If you want to see some real shit, compare the paltry wage growth of workers to the increase in CEO pay, or the increase in total GDP, or the increase in productivity and efficiency of our economy. It's not even close to proportional.
Average individual wage growth is always higher than the simple average hourly earnings growth, and there are a few reasons for this.
So he claims here that there are a few reasons for this, but proceeds to give literally none.
That's a terrible argument!
And I want you to do your own mental exercise, because anecdotal obviously doesn't necessarily prove a point, but the empirical data, I believe, will match up with your anecdotal experience.
Are you fucking serious? Anecdote Andy over here. Wait. No, that's not even fair to people who argue from anecdotes, as he's asking his audience to imagine hypothetical situations in which he is correct. Jesus, just feel your way to the facts, guys. Data? Who needs it?
So anyone out there right now who's done a job or been in a career in the same field of work for more than 10 years watching right now, okay? I'd like you to comment below. If you have been doing the same job or working with the same company, same field of work for 10 years, I want you to do some math. Have you only seen a 2% wage growth? I would challenge anyone out there.
Even if we're charitable here and assume that he means the same company or same job or same field, and that we're talking about yearly wage increases as opposed to a net 2% growth over an entire career, how many people have actually spent 10 years with the same company, field, or job? I'd be willing to bet not many. And should you really have to stick with the same line of work in order to make ends meet? You see, unlike Crowder and his crew, I actually like freedom, you know, so, for example, the freedom to pursue your passions and not necessarily be stuck in a shitty career that only barely allows you to scrape by.
Lower earners at the beginning of their life, by the way, they tend to have the most wage growth. As people get older, they get wealthier, the percentage of wage growth is less. So if you're seeing that sort of pay bump bottom out a little bit, that now it maybe used to be 10%, 12%, now it's 2%, that means you're probably being paid pretty well if it's over a lifetime.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm pretty sure Crowder's referencing this graph from the Dallas Federal Reserve article, which I'll remind you is specifically looking at white boomers. And hey, would you look at that? Even for these white boomers, you need at least a bachelor's degree to keep from getting an effective pay cut every year. Also, this is relativistic increases and tells us nothing about flat numbers. A 1% increase to your wages when you make, say, $3 an hour plus tips is completely meaningless. So obviously this is way worse for lower income earners, and yeah, I know, big surprise there. And of course, this article says nothing of the fact that many services are being privatized, so that there are more things you have to buy to survive, and that the price of some goods, such as housing, rises way faster than inflation.
By the way, on top of that, wage growth just hit a 10-year high, despite all the models predicting the exact opposite, and it seems like it's likely to keep accelerating.
So, sorry for all the in-depth analysis of boring shit, pals, guys and gals. I know that there isn't a single right-winger in the history of the planet that's ever arrived at their positions from a meticulous research of economics, but god damn it if I'm not going to do my due diligence. Now, no worries, I promise you some juicier shit is coming up soon, so stick with me. This data doesn't count inflation, and I find it kind of curious that it doesn't take into account the massive hit workers took in the 2008 market crash. For all we know, even at its highest point here, there hasn't been a full recovery. My Nakama Garth and Nathan in the comment section sure do know what's up, though.
All right, listen, frankly, much wage growth. You're going to be so tired of all the growth with your wages. You won't have room. Your wages will have stretch marks, okay?
Oh man, this is one of my favorite parts of the video. You see, one of the co-hosts here tries to correct Crowder on something, but he's too busy doing shitty impersonations to give a fuck. The sycophants, of course, laugh on cue. Look, I know the term sycophant can seem derogatory, so let me be very clear here. There ain't nobody worked harder for a paycheck than these poor bastards.
Here's a second lie. It's really stupid, but I'm going to point out why I think you'll realize it's stupid on its face, but you often don't think of it this way. That wealth inequality is a huge problem.
We want to deal with the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality in America. Very few people think it is acceptable or moral that the top 0.1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%.
I love how base Bernie is being here. Fiery hot truth he's laying down here is so powerful. These shit kickers can't come up with literally anything to say.
My man. Here's what I call a stupid exercise. If I doubled every single person right now, watching, listening, doubled all of our incomes tomorrow, every single one, wealth inequality would increase. Would you be pissed?
All right, last bit of math. I swear on a stack of Bibles. In this scenario, the distribution of wealth, aka the proportion of inequality, would be completely unchanged. Jesus Christ, I wish I could grant Crowder a modicum of self-awareness so that he could know how truly brain-dead he's being right now. Even in his own hypothetical thought experiments he deploys to try and prove his points, he is dead-ass wrong on just the basic arithmetic. This is a notice to all you dumb fuck, smug-ass conservatards who post shit like, leftists no understand basic economics.
I'll have you know I graduated top of my college calculus class 2 years in a row before I graduated high school. Don't you dare try to step to me, because you get blown the fuck out 200% of the time. Because there's seriously a single right-wing political commentator who can either hope or not where they challenge my massive and bit of it.
This, of course, is a joke. You don't have to be particularly smart or knowledgeable to see that these arguments are embarrassingly facile and obviously childish.
Would you prefer to live in a place like Cuba or Venezuela?
Oh man, I can't let this devolve into a documentary on Venezuela right now, especially since we're so close to being done with this terrible piece of shit video. Haha, we're not even a little bit close. Let's just say that a large part of Venezuela's problems are caused by America, and even if they were the sole cause of their own economic issues, the workers don't collectively own the means of production, so they're not a socialist country, you dipshit. Now look, they have had socialist leaders attempting to move towards socialism, but again, these ignoramuses don't even know what socialism means, so I'm really just pissing in the wind here.
Problem isn't poverty, the problem is wealth inequality.
So I know that this is an oopsie, a flub, a goof and or gaffe, but I think it's fucking hilarious. The truth can't help but desperately force its way out of his lying suckhole.
I know that there are some nations in between. I'm not saying your only choice is the United States or Cuba. Generally speaking, socialism simply socializes mediocrity, poverty.
So we start with the subtle implication that poverty stems from laziness, which, nice meme. As we discussed earlier, in general, your economic status is largely dependent on your parents. And this goes double for Crowder. But I think this is a good time to debunk the conservative myth of meritocracy. First off, no one deserves anything, but even still, we don't live in anything close to a meritocracy. This is a bullshit talking point that the right has pushed on us for decades, but in my opinion, no one has refuted it any better than the great socialist Martin Luther King Jr. Yes, that one. Whenever the government provides opportunities and privileges for white people and rich people, they call it subsidized. When they do it for Negro and poor people, they call it welfare. The fact is that everyone in this country lives on welfare. Suburbia was built with federally subsidized credit, and the highways that take our white brothers out to the suburbs were built with federally subsidized money to the tune of 90%. Everyone is on welfare in this country. The problem is that we all too often have socialism for the rich and rugged free enterprise capitalism for the poor.
Matter of fact, every study that we have available shows there's no correlation between wealth inequality and the poverty rate.
So when Crowder says every study we have available, what he actually means is one unlinked, unnamed study from the Cato Institute. In case you are unaware, the Cato Institute is a far-right propaganda group founded by the Koch brothers. What's that? There's only one of them left. But if you look at the data, what the fuck is it even supposed to be showing? The Gini coefficient here on the y-axis is a method of measuring economic inequality that is notoriously flawed. But the problem is it's measured on a scale from 0 to 1, but the label on the y-axis here is in a 1/100th of a 1980 index? Like, well, what does that even mean? And of course, they're contrasting this with the dotted lines here, which are various ways of measuring where exactly the poverty line is at. Now, there's a lot of fishiness with the data here, like how they don't explain their scale, and they don't account for the fact that where where exactly we draw the poverty line is a goalpost that moves all the time based off of political utility. But here's the thing. Even if I grant them that economic inequality doesn't cause poverty, there's still the inequality, which is a societal ill in and of itself. You see, money is power, which means that the people who have billions of dollars to spend can shape society in ways that benefit themselves at your expense. And look, as a proud Amerifat, I can't fucking stand that freedom-hating shit. Also, quick aside, but there's a lot of similarities between the blog post where Crowder got this info and this video just in general, including a more intelligent version of his double everyone's income hypothetical. And in case you didn't know, not only did he badly plagiarize this talking point, but he's also funded by the same dirty Koch money as the Cato Institute. And they sure are coming up a lot in this fucking video, aren't they?
Usually as wealth inequality becomes big, as that gap becomes bigger, conditions of poor families have actually improved.
So he's just making shit up again. Not even the lunatics at the Cato Institute would be willing to make this claim. At best, you can claim that income inequality and poverty aren't directly correlated, but that's a far cry from proving an inverse correlation. Man, why can't they just keep their fetish for being dominated by rich assholes private and let me live my life the way I want to? Jesus Christ.
Here's you know, it's not so much a lie that they push. Let me set this up with a fact. Socialism has never actually worked. Okay?
If socialism is such a non-threat, how come the U.S. is always stepping in and murdering democratically elected leaders attempting to do a socialism?
And they always try to claim that it's never been tried properly, or where it has been tried properly now, they've pivoted, and this is only the last 10 years, to the Scandinavian countries that they're all socialist. Here you go.
What happened in Venezuela? They call that democratic socialism. But
it looks like he's masturbating on a subway.
The problem is, though, brothers, that any time there's been the attempts of ordinary people to engage in self-determination, they can get crushed by external nations. Look at U.S. policies toward Venezuela has been very, very ugly. Nicaragua in the same way. So we've never had a chance to really pull it off. So it's only been a movement so far.
Deep breathing, all right? All right. Now that we're cool, calm, and collected, let's just compare these two people for a second. On the one hand here, we have Cornel West wearing a clean, well-pressed suit speaking to Tucker Carlson on what looks like Princeton University. Now, West has a PhD in philosophy from an Ivy League school. He's the recipient of more than 20 honorary degrees. He won the American Book Award, has written or contributed to over 20 published books. He's the honorary chair of the Democratic Socialists of America, advisory board of International Bridges to Justice. He's received special recognition from the World Cultural Council. I could just go on and on and on. Crowder, on the other hand, is a schlubby, uneducated doofus whose biggest accomplishment in life is having rich parents. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that higher learning is essential to becoming an intelligent or helpful person, or that Cornell's accomplishments make him a better class of person. And I'm not saying that one's appearance has any relevance to their argument, but let's not lie to ourselves. Not only does Crowder not measure up morally, intellectually, or even aesthetically, but the fact that Crowder's doing the hurt dirt, he's jacking it on a subway is another clear demonstration of his racism. To Crowder's point, as Brother Cornell so eloquently put it.
But part of the problem is, though, brothers, that any time there's been the attempts of ordinary people to engage in self-determination, they can get crushed by external nations. Look at U.S. policies toward Venezuela has been very, very ugly. Nicaragua in the same way. We saw that in so many other instances where countries tried to engage in self-determination and they either get crushed, they either get coerced, and they end up oftentimes responding to that kind of authoritarian treatment. So we've never had a chance to really pull it off. So it's only been a movement so far. It's an attempt to resist the greed at the top, the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, the various ways in which humanity is violated rather than affirmed.
If you want your mind blown here, the leadership of the USSR and China both admitted that they weren't socialist, but that they were working to set the stage for socialism. Allegedly.
Well, so long as we know what democratic socialism is, and if we know that in countries in Scandinavia, like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, they are very democratic countries, obviously.
America to look more like Scandinavia.
That's right. That's right. And what's wrong with that?
Look, I put the anal in analysis, so I'm not crazy when people call Scandinavian countries socialist, because technically they're not. But I will admit that in a looser, more colloquial sense, they do embody the socialist values, you know, wanting to improve the lives of working class people and other disadvantaged communities, in stark contrast to the way things typically go here in America.
Well, there's a lot wrong with that. First off, the snus.
The snus?
It's a snooze.
Is it snooze?
Snooze,
If
man.
the tobacco goes up your nose.
Oh, never mind.
That's snuff.
No,
Snooze
snuff goes in your lip. Snuff goes up your nose.
Snooze goes here, snuff goes here.
I don't know anything about tobacco outside of cigars, which, by the way, ironically come from a lot of these crap-hole countries.
Oh. This is such a brilliant and beautiful object lesson on how much of a weaselly little liar this Crowder dude is. When he knows literally nothing about a topic, his first instinct is to just make up shit that sounds plausible to him. Really tells you something, doesn't it?
They try to say Venezuela, a truly socialist and, by the way, oil-rich country, kind of starting on phase 3. Only failed because of U.S. policies?
Now, only might be a strong way to put it, but yeah, I mean, that's pretty much true. I mean, sure, Venezuela could have diversified the revenue streams away from oil exports, you know, anticipating the inevitable backlash, but again, that's only really a problem because of U.S. policy. Now, I won't fault Crowder too much for his ignorance on this topic, as a lot more has developed on this Venezuela issue since he originally published this video, such as Trump honoring the unelected Juan Guaido as the real head of Venezuela. Always a pleasure seeing the land of the slaves and the home of the Whopper, honoring murderous right-wing would-be dictators.
Did a whole segment on this, so I'm just going to sort of brush on this. Scandinavian countries, actually, they built up their wealth under free market economies.
So while, unfortunately, the Scandinavian countries are still capitalist, they built their economies up using what economists would refer to as Keynesian economics, not free markets. Let me explain with a brief history lesson. Yeah, I know, you come here for the dank memes and not lectures on history and economics, but you're already in too deep to stop the video now. Named after the economist John Maynard Keynes, Keynesian economics is, in a nutshell, the acknowledgement of the fact that government intervention in the economy, especially in times of crisis, is more effective at meeting the needs of society than private investment. His theories were developed during the Great Depression, and it was FDR's implementation of these interventionist policies, under pressure from American socialists, that got us out of the Great Depression and, more broadly, allowed the Allied powers of World War II to win the war. Not only that, but these Keynesian economic policies caused the most prosperous era in all of human history, and ushered in what is known as the post-war consensus, which was broad agreement on the left and right wings of politics on economic issues. Some specific tenets of this new economic consensus were nationalization of essential services, allowing unions to exist, modest government regulation, higher taxes and public investment in social welfare, in part to prevent far-right movements like fascism from rising up again. There were still fundamental issues with this post-war consensus, economic and racial inequality, etc., but compared to the economic and political system that preceded and succeeded it, it was a vastly superior version of capitalism.
Then, everything changed when
we returned to a more laissez-faire economic system that is called neoliberalism. Now, you've probably heard the term neoliberalism tossed around, but in case you weren't aware of what it means, it's simply a faith-based religious dogma based on pursuing deregulation, privatization, free trade, and austerity at any cost. Basically, rather than being concerned with the material outcomes of our economic policy, they ruthlessly pursue cost-cutting measures for the super rich, which, if you know nothing of economics or human nature, might sound good in theory, but in reality causes a lot of unnecessary human suffering. So you might have noticed that neoliberalism is very reminiscent of Reaganomics or trickle-down economics, and that's because Ronald Reagan was handpicked by far-right political operatives as they knew he was a useful and compliant bitch. Shortly after, it spread to Britain with the infamous Margaret Thatcher, and since then, neoliberalism has basically become the new global economic consensus. While it's certainly championed more aggressively by libertarians and other extremists, basically every politician in America, with some notable exceptions, has followed this pseudoscientific malarkey. Yes, even the socialist Barack Hussein Obama. So, to badly summarize, this current global economic paradigm is any negative social outcomes, to include a renewed interest in fascism, is fine as long as stonks go up. And newsflash, in case you weren't aware, we're doing a pretty damn good job of reviving fascism.
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
Wait, wasn't I supposed to be talking about Scandinavian countries? Oh, right. So, like all developed countries of the world, their development was only possible through government interference in private markets. And while they were and still are capitalist, it was under a much more humane and reasonable version of capitalism that has allowed them to climb to the top of world happiness charts, et cetera, et cetera.
And right now, they're actually moving much more toward free market capitalism, despite their incredibly small, homogenous populations, by the way.
Now, you might be confused. What exactly does the homogeneity of their population have to do with economic policy? Well, I can't be 100% sure on this, but what I think happened here is that Crowder fucked up a common racist talking point. For those of you not as familiar with the conservative playbook as I am, this is how it usually goes. While socialized medicine works in their Scandinavian countries, that's only because their population is relatively small and is ethnically homogeneous. Do you guys hear that? That whistling sound just barely on the edge of perception? That's a dog whistle. In case you didn't know, right-wing politics is so obviously despicable that they have to couch their vile beliefs in euphemism in order to sneak it past normies and appeal to their hateful base. By the way, this isn't some crazy leftist conspiracy theory, it's a fact confirmed by lifelong Republicans.
Start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger, that hurts your backfire, so you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites.
Now here's the crazy part. I don't even think Crowder was trying to do a racism here. I just think that he's so ignorant and gullible that whenever he heard this racist propaganda, he just uncritically accepted it and seamlessly integrated it into his worldview and now just mindlessly repeats it whenever Scandinavian countries come up.
And keep in mind, their top corporate tax rates actually lower than the United States were under Obama. We're actually going their direction now, finally, for the first time.
Holy fucking shit. I had to double and triple check this, but I think he actually got a piece of datum correct. Holy shit. You know what? Their top corporate tax rate is lower than ours was under Obama. Although not lower than it is under Trump, BT dubs. What exactly is the political significance of this random bit of trivia anyway? I mean, for one, while the corporate tax rate was technically lower, it was only lower by an average of about 7%. And what Crowder isn't telling you is that the tax rate on top income earners, value-added taxes or VATs, and capital gains taxes are all way higher in Scandinavian countries than they are in America. They also tend to have stronger unions, free college, universal health care, lower unemployment, more gender parity, more economic and political freedom, etc., 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 etc. So did you catch the con they're trying to pull? By narrowly focusing on the top corporate tax rate, it could appear as if lower taxes are correlated with a higher standard of living. This is crucial because even for dishonest actors like Crowder here, it is undeniable that Scandinavians have a higher standard of living and live longer, happier, and more fulfilling lives than we do here in the States. But rather than doing the honorable thing and trying to find ways in which we could replicate those outcomes for our fellow Americans, conservatives would rather lie and play make-believe that lower taxes improve people's standards of living by cherry-picking their data and ignoring the fact that these Scandinavian countries more than make up for it with higher taxes in other areas.
And something else that is remarkable to me, did you know that when Scandinavian people move to the United States, they have higher standards of living on average than those in the Scandinavian countries? In other words, Danes in the United States have it better than Danes in Denmark. Swedes in the United States have it better than Swedes in Sweden.
Now, Crowder is being obnoxiously fucking vague when he says that the Scandinavian Americans have a higher standard of living in the US than their native counterparts. And for the life of me, I can't find a source for the graph he screenshotted here. So for the sake of argument, I'll just assume that this data is legit and debunk it before moving on to examine some further corroborating data. So first off, treating GDP per capita as equivalent to standard of living is not only an equivocation fallacy, but also comparing apples to oranges. As mentioned several times before in this video, Crowder is failing to account for all the essential services that are provided free of charge. From a standard of living perspective, it doesn't matter if Scandinavians are getting less take-home income, because being forced to take on life-destroying debt when you get sick or want to go to college doesn't happen in Scandinavian countries, because they have, universal healthcare, free higher education, among other social welfare programs. This means not only is their standard of living and quality of life higher than it is for Americans, but their wages are effectively higher too. Because they don't have to waste money servicing debt, their money can go a lot further. So moving on to the corroborating data, Scandinavians rarely immigrate to America, and when they do, they usually go back to their home countries because, comparatively speaking, America sucks. Unless, of course, you're hyper rich. You see, while it's extremely difficult for your average person to immigrate to America, full process can take over a decade. It's actually very easy if you're rich. The problem with the system is that these selfish, lazy pieces of shit contribute nothing to society and merely want to leech off of our system. You know, basically conservatives' histrionic caricature of legal Central and South American immigrants. And hey, speaking of immigration, I've never heard a conservative spend any time critiquing Scandinavian or any other form of predominantly white immigration, even when they come here illegally.
Without the high suicide rate.
Is there a super high suicide rate? I knew it was Japan.
Suicide. Well, I know Japan, but I thought
Norway.
Norway, yes.
That's just because of the weather, and they all have to watch Let the Right One In.
More of that classic conservative humor, you know, like damn foreigner movies. I can do the southern accent. I am from the South. No disrespect to my southern comrade.
You're cancelled.
I'm such a ridiculously meticulous basket case that I actually watched Let the Right One In preparation for this response video. Now, no worries, I'm not going to spoil anything, but in case you were wondering, here's what I think of the film. Watch it. It's a great movie. Firmly belongs in the A tier, or I don't know, like an 8.6 out of 10. Some quick highlights in case I haven't already sold you on it. Great cinematography, excellent mood and pacing, and it tackles some really interesting, like, gritty, emotional topics. Now, this mini review has literally nothing to do with any of Crowder's arguments or with these jokes again. Anyway, whatever. After watching Let the Right One In, I really can't recommend it enough. Please check it out.
Yeah, and by the way, how many times do they have to come on camera and say, Bernie, please stop pointing to us as socialists?
Yeah.
We're not socialists.
So, I was going to deliver another long-ass speech on what socialism is and isn't, but to be honest, I can't do a better job than this meme, so I'm just going to leave this here.
They have a lot of. They have a social safety net, which, by the way, is why cars, for example, I think in Denmark, most people can't afford used cars. You can go to lotoscredit.com. Yeah. We wrote an article about this not long ago because the taxes are unbelievable.
Yeah.
In order to prevent the needless suffering and death of innocent people, I have to pay some of my massive income and taxes.
Also, most Americans can't afford a car either, you fucking dipshit. Oh, and you know I can't move on without drawing your attention to Crowder citing his own blog post as if it was some sort of reputable source of information.
Nice try.
There's a huge burden on the middle class. That being said, they built up their wealth under free market economies.
So the myth of the middle class was an invention of our ruling class to sow division among the working class and to draw attention away from themselves. There isn't and never was a middle class. Now, that being said, they didn't build up their economies under free market capitalism. That's just a comforting lie. Well, I mean, comforting to Crowder anyway. But I guess maybe if you repeat it often enough, maybe that lie will eventually become the truth. I mean, who knows?
So you can't claim that a country... If the United States, for example, tomorrow became a socialist country. If the United States, for example, tomorrow became a socialist country.
I'm kidding.
Would you say that we became the world's greatest superpower under socialism?
No.
Of course not.
No.
No? What? Who exactly are you arguing against? Jesus Christ. Crowder is so out of touch, he has literally no idea what the arguments are, or even what people are arguing about in the first place. I mean, just imagine arguing against a straw man and losing. Super fucking Hazukashi des, man.
Obviously, I would say that the facts are on our side, okay? Because I just listed over a dozen.
I mean, I take objection to calling these reheated leftovers of tired old conservative arguments facts, but as I've been demonstrating this entire video, even if we accept all of this data as flawlessly accurate, which I wouldn't recommend, the implications of this data and the way it is framed, aka the analysis, is nothing but pure ideological bullshit. And sure, if you selectively cherry pick your data, you can spruce it up in such a way that sure, yeah, maybe your side will look good, but really it's all smoke and mirrors that'll implode with even the slightest bit of resistance.
One thing that can't be denied is that even in theory, capitalist free enterprisers, the conservative worldview can only function if an individual feels empowered. What?
Wait, no, for serious, what the fuck is he on about? Conservatism is fundamentally based in creating, maintaining, and justifying a strict traditionalist caste system. When it comes to empowerment, such as freeing the slaves, desegregation, implementing basic social safety nets, respecting the rights of indigenous people, gay marriage, legalization of marijuana, trans rights, etc., 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 conservatives in every country, at every point in time, are always on the wrong side of history because, hey, newsflash here, conservatives hate individual freedom because it hurts their sensitive boomer fifis and makes them feel vulnerable and insecure. Fuck off.
And I know that Bernie bros are going to say that that's a lie because of the system, man. All right, I know.
Jesus, how fucking convenient. Crowder completely dismisses any systemic critique just as a matter of principle, I guess. Did you catch that? I mean, he just hand waves it away. Sure is awful convenient for people who don't want to see any sort of social change.
The fact is that the conservative message is predicated on the idea that individuals feel optimistic about their opportunities in future.
All right, this is just straight up bullshit. First of all, even if this statement was true, it says nothing to the efficacy or morality of conservative policy. Now, of course, that being said, the truth is that conservatives actually campaign almost exclusively on fear and negativity. In fact, if we're being honest here, both parties usually run campaigns at least partially based on, other team made it, things worse, but you know what, we can fix it. Fact is, outside of a narrow range of specific cultural wedge issues, which the Dems are admittedly better on, the Democratic and Republican establishment ultimately wants the same thing. For you to know your place, get back to work, and make that money. For your boss, obviously, not for yourself.
Socialists can only remain in power by convincing the entire population of hopelessness.
Call me crazy, but what if you actually are in a bad position through no fault of your own? Well, I mean, at least according to Crowder here, conservatism has nothing to offer you. It's almost like conservatism was designed to protect the interests of people who already have all the power and to legitimize some sort of strict caste system that favors them unfairly. Almost. But is socialism all about hopelessness? I mean, to a certain extent, that's a subjective matter of opinion, but I mean, personally, I find most socialist messaging to be quite hopeful.
Take a look around you and find someone you don't know. Maybe somebody doesn't look kind of like you. Are you willing to fight for that person as much as you're willing to fight for yourself?
Conservatives have to campaign on, hey, anyone can make it in America. You're good enough.
Pay no attention to the ways in which we're fucking you over. Just keep working harder, peasant. Your life is good enough.
Democrats and socialists but I repeat myself, have to campaign on, you can't make it. You're not good enough. Others are going to win, you'll lose, and none of it is in your control because it's all a part of the system.
While I disagree with the framing, fundamentally, he's not wrong. For many Americans, it's an undeniable fact of life that there's a small group of people who are getting ahead at their expense, and there's not much that they can, at least as alone individuals, do about it. Now, sure, these disadvantaged people could get together with others in similar situations and somehow work collectively.
That's communism! It is a selfish appeal, and certainly right now in the United States, it's not based on truth.
I've heard a lot of smears leveled against socialists in my day, but selfish? Now that might actually be a new one. Now, maybe it's just because I hate myself, but I watch dozens of hours of conservative propaganda every week, so I'd like to think that I'm pretty good at putting myself into a right-wing mindset, but to be honest, I'm kind of at a loss here. Wanting basic human rights and living a dignified life free of exploitation and abuse.
How selfish of you.
Right now, in an economy with the lowest unemployment, highest job participation, least amount of firings, most amount of jobs available in decades, they're still selling you propaganda.
It never gets old that conservative propagandists who deal exclusively in hateful, emotional-based political opinions like to frame themselves as the cool-headed, logical rationalists. There is literally no group in all of human history more fundamentally opposed to the ideals of the Enlightenment than bigoted, hypersensitive, God-bothering, conspiracy-minded conservative sociopaths. Well, I mean, other than fascists, I guess, but what's the difference?
You couldn't possibly make it without them.
Speaking specifically of the Democratic establishment, I mean, they do often sell themselves as the only alternative to the crazy right-wingers. Because they kind of are. To any Zoomers who might be watching who are too young to remember a time before Trump, Republicans not only fought tooth and nail against any form of gay rights, they specifically ran on keeping them second-class citizens. And even though he pretended to be cool with gays that one time, Trump has continuously repealed Obama-era legislation that provided some modest legal protections for the LGBT community. But let's be clear here. While the Democrats are technically better, it ain't by much. Take Joe Biden, the 2020 Democratic presidential candidate, who worked with known racists to stop desegregation and has been caught multiple times on video sexually abusing children.
Now, you getting in this picture?
Whispered some encouragement, telling her that she was doing great, that she looked wonderful.
Do we need Democrats? Well, I mean, to a certain extent, no. I mean, at least I'd argue what we really need is some sort of actual leftist political movement in the United States. But even after Bernie, that still seems like something of a distant goal. So, barring that, in our current two-party system, Dems really are our only buffer between us and fascism. I mean, I really wish it was different, believe me, but look, that's the hand we've been dealt.
And I'll come out and say it. In 2019, only the weakest among you buy that lie.
So just as an FYI, yelling at poor people, telling them that it's their own personal fault for being poor, not only is that factually incorrect, it's a really bad look.
The unemployment right now in the United States is literally 3.5%. If you can't find a job now, just fucking end it all. You're never going to be anything in life.
If you look at all of the prospects I just listed out there and you don't feel hopeful in any way, there's no hope for you. You lost hope long before you made that walk to the ballot box. That's my biggest problem with socialism.
Oh, phew.
Everything comes to an end.
And with that, I am finally done with this frustrating, emotionally compromised, manipulative, propagandistic, bullshit-spewing asshat. But that's all I got. If you didn't know anything about socialism before, well, hopefully you do now, and enough dicking around. Catch y'all later. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. Next week is going to be all new stuff. I really appreciate the support from you guys out there. Be sure to subscribe, and God bless.
Steven?